Good morning, everybody, and this is another edition of the 9 o'clock Meltdown podcast. And over speakerphone, I have the also wonderful, bit more jazz musician, Bryan Gatten. He is a local staple here in Duluth, Minnesota. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, of course, of course. And now, Brian, I had you on the show, well, you just said about 5 years ago. It's hard to believe I've been doing this long, but it'll be 11 years next December. So,
Wow.
thank you so much for coming on again.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And now, like I said, you're a little bit more of a kind of jazz musician, and you're very well versed in guitar. I mean, holy Hannah, I've heard you play before. You're absolutely amazing. You can
Thanks.
improvise. You make the guitar sing. Honestly, how did that start for you?
Well, first of all, thanks for saying that, and hearing that I make the guitar sing is a big compliment for me because that's always been my goal since I don't sing.
Okay.
And to kind of reach people in that way, my ultimate goal on the instrument. So thanks for saying that. I started playing when I was 6 years old, and I'm 32 now, so pretty much my whole life I've been playing guitar. And I was pretty serious about it from the start. And, of course, when you're a kid, you don't practice quite as much. I mean, there are child prodigies that spend all their time practicing. I was just basically a normal kid that played guitar, but got more serious about it as time went on. I came out with my first album when I was 13.
Wow.
Recorded that in a studio with my dad and a couple other musicians that he knew, and that was a great experience, and basically just kept on with it from there.
Excellent, excellent. And now I've talked to a lot of musicians, but I don't think any of them say they started when they were a child. Did you have to kind of beg your parents to get you a guitar, or it sounds like your dad was a musician as well?
Yes, my dad plays bass, and so he had an acoustic guitar just laying around the house, and he would play that. So sometimes he was primarily a bass player, but he knew a couple of things on the guitar as well. And so when I was a toddler, I would mess with that a little bit. And there's actually videos of me at like 1.5, 2 years old with a little plastic like Mickey Mouse guitar running around and watching concert videos on VHS and all that stuff. And so it was something that was always part of my life. I don't remember before and after when I wanted to do it. By the time I was old enough, meaning like my hands were big enough and I knew my ABCs and how to count and all that stuff, I started being more interested in actually taking lessons and figuring out what to do with it. And the funny thing is that this was in Connecticut at the time. The music store where my parents went to get me lessons actually didn't want to take me in yet because they thought I was too young. They said, well, if
Really?
kids start too young, they get discouraged and they don't stick with it. But my dad convinced them to let me come in when I was 6 years old. And I started with a teacher whose name was Doug. And I studied with him until I was like a sophomore in high school. So he pretty much watched me grow up in that way. Of course, I did stick with it. And I ended up even working at that music store when I was in high school and things like that. So they were a little bit skeptical of my age, but it happened to work out. I think every case is probably different with that anyway.
Well, and
So.
I can attest to that. I picked up the flute when I was in probably on the cusp of 7th grade, and I'm absolutely horrible. I never practice. Yet I played it for all my years of high school up until senior, and now I've even played it in the Duluth music scene a little bit with several different bands and things like that. So,
Right.
yes, everyone is completely different.
Yep.
But good for you for sticking with it and has kind of playing guitar, and I know you also give lessons as well. Has that kind of always been your path? Has that been what you've always wanted to do with your life?
Yeah, when I was a little kid, I was like, well, I'll play guitar and I'll be an X-Man or something too, But then once I got older, and I started thinking about what I really wanted to do, that was pretty much the only thing I had in mind. By the time I got into high school, I knew it was what I was going to do, and that was pretty unique amongst my friends because most of the time I think people are trying to figure out what they want to do, and so I always knew that, but I didn't always know what exact path it was going to take. I knew that playing the guitar was going to be what I was going to do, but I didn't know what kind of work I'd be doing with it and all that. And so I kind of started teaching in high school just basically because people would come up and ask me to teach, and then continued doing it out of necessity because it paid more than working at the local music store.
Really?
So that's how that kind of started. Although I haven't been doing much teaching lately just because of everything going on. But the playing has always been my primary focus, and the teaching has been something I like to do because I like to share my knowledge and work with people and kind of give back in a way that I had two really great teachers when I was growing up, and so I do feel a little bit of responsibility to pass on what they taught me as well. But the performance has always been my main focus.
Wonderful, Brian, wonderful. And you had said earlier that, when I said you make the guitar sing, that you actually don't sing as well. And that's a little bit more, not necessarily unique. There are plenty of players out there that just kind of play their instrument and that's how they get their ideas or soul across in a way. But up here, it's not. I mean, there are lots of singer-songwriters that have the guitar and stuff like that. Do you think that kind of makes you unique and kind of stand out from the crowd, I guess I could say?
I think so. I mean, there are a couple of bands in the area that I know of that are primarily instrumental, or at least that there were. I'm not sure if they're still playing. But as far as especially solo musicians, I need a lot of the places where I used to play, craft breweries and restaurants and bars and stuff. It tends to be mostly like the singer-songwriter type thing, like you mentioned. And so I definitely think that it's a more unique thing for me standing up there with a guitar. Although I have to say that audiences here in Duluth and in the surrounding area have been very open-minded about it. I can count the times on one hand where people have come up to me and be like, "So, are you going to sing or whatever?" I mean, it really, of all the hundreds of gigs that I've done every year, it's like in the single digits amount of times that it's been a problem for people, or at least with their Minnesota passive aggressive, at least that they've said to me. Yeah. So I grew up in New England, and they were a lot less shy about it. So when I would play out there, whether it was in a band and it was instrumental, or if I was playing solo, people sometimes it would be like they were personally offended that I wasn't singing or something like that. And I haven't dealt with that at all out here. It's been very, oftentimes I don't even think about it. And I don't get the impression that a lot of the people who are listening to me are even really thinking about it. And that's my goal. I've never wanted to do just like guitar music for guitar nerds, because there is that type of stuff out there. It's like this super technical stuff that really only other guitarists will enjoy and appreciate and all that stuff, and that's never been my goal. I don't even want people to think that I'm not singing, that they're just enjoying what they're hearing. So
yeah, to enjoy kind of the ambiance that you're putting forward.
Right.
Wonderful. Brian, first off, what brought you to Duluth? Kind of when people talk about the East Coast, there's a larger scene out there. There's more kind of niches that you can fall into, and that kind of goes with both coasts, honestly. Right. Now, with that being said, there's not just one music scene, and it's New York or LA. No, there's pockets of music scenes everywhere, and you can do things basically anywhere. And now with the joys of the internet, I mean, you can literally be anywhere.
Yes, you can go global.
yes, definitely. Which we'll get into that in a minute here with you. But what brought you to Duluth?
Well, so my dad lived in Duluth in the early 80s. He was a working musician here where he played full-time, and those were the days where people were playing 6 nights a week. And so that was all that he did. He played in a band and made a lot of connections here with that. And then he moved down to the cities, which is where he met my mom and where I was born. Oh, okay. And so I was actually born in St. Paul, but when I was still like 6 months or 7 months old, because of my dad's job, we moved out to Connecticut, and then that's where I grew up and all that. And so in 2007, my family took a vacation out to Duluth to kind of show us, like Minnesota, where I was born, and where my parents lived and all that stuff. And so we stayed in Duluth for a couple of weeks, and I just basically fell in love with the city. I felt a strong connection here. And then in 2012, my wife and I honeymooned here after the wedding, and She loved it too, and I started looking more into like, well, what's the music scene like here and that sort of thing. And I found that even though size-wise Duluth is maybe at best called a mid-size city, pretty kind of a smaller market than what I was dealing with out on the East Coast, that the music scene was really like per capita, it was really happening. You know, there's so many places to play, and it seemed pretty laid back. I mean, the thing with the big scenes, like you mentioned, New York and LA, and even like Nashville these days and things like that, is they're so big, and it's not in terms of competition, in terms of talent, but like I had trouble getting paid in New York City because if I didn't want to play a gig for free, or there were even some gigs where I had to pay to do the gig.
Really?
If I didn't want to do that, there was 2 million other people who would be willing to do that, you know. And so actually when I came out to Duluth and I got paid like $50 for a gig, I thought, man, I'm rich now, you know, because I couldn't even get a guarantee out on the East Coast just because of what the scene was like. So even though the numbers of people and maybe, you know, big events and stuff like that were different, I thought that I had a better chance of doing what I wanted to do here in Duluth. And so my wife and I were like, well, we're millennials, we can be poor anywhere in the country, we might as well just do it where we want to do it. And we moved to Duluth in 2013, and I had a gig that week that we moved here, and I haven't stopped since. So.
Excellent, Bryan. That's absolutely fabulous. And you know, you answered about 12 of my other questions right in that answer. So, moving on. No, I'm kidding. That's interesting to hear because I've talked to a lot of different people, and I've talked to people out in LA and out in New York and things like that, and everybody's got kind of a different opinion and a different thought process on it. So it's kind of interesting to hear that it's not necessarily the competition size, but it's what you're willing to sacrifice. Even.
Yes.
That's very interesting. And that's interesting that places wouldn't pay to have a musician, or they would make you pay to be there. I mean, that just kind of sounds outrageous to my Minnesota working self, but...
And that was a big part because I was in the original music scene out there. It was totally different from like the cover band, bar band thing.
Okay.
And so like with the original music scene, they want you to sell like, I remember talking to one place in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and they were saying, they wanted me to bring 60 people out to their little tiny bar. And it had to be guaranteed. I had to sell 60 tickets to it ahead of time or I wouldn't be able to play. And I remember asking them, they were charging for tickets at the door, but there was no the cover charge is super weird, so I didn't trust them. So I kind of pushed back a little bit, saying like, well, what's our cut and all this stuff. Because I told them, I said I could bring 60 people. I can rent a place and bring 60 people out and charge them $10 a piece and get $600, and that's a good price for a gig. And they got really mad about that. So a lot of places made it so that basically you had to buy the tickets yourself or, sell them to your family and friends or you wouldn't be able to play, and that sort of thing. So it was a really weird scene, and that was pretty commonplace out there. Even the cover bands that I was in didn't get paid as much as the bar band I played with out here. So it's a very, very strange scene. You would think that it would be, all the numbers would be bigger, but it's really just the number of people that's bigger. And so it's very strange that I think the way that the national and international music scene is, and of course it's really different right now too in the last few months. But it is the typical way that people think, like, okay, I'm going to be an actor, so I'm going to go out to LA, or I want to be on Broadway, so I'm going to go out to New York. It used to be true of the music scene, I think, but it's not really like that anymore. I think it might work for some people. They maybe have a specific lead in New York or something like that where that works. But for the most part, there are so many musicians out there, and everybody's doing their own DIY stuff anyway, even before the COVID stuff, that it really just does come down to, well, who you know and all that stuff. And there were parts of that game I just wasn't willing to play. And so I thought, well, I can go to Duluth, I can play whatever I want and get paid and, a lot of times even get fed by the places where I'm playing. And then a 5-minute drive and I'm home. So what could be better than that? And I'm playing next to Lake Superior. I mean, that was hard for me to turn down.
Well, perfect, and I'm glad you guys both moved here. Excellent, excellent. And now, Brian, you and I, we met actually 5 years ago now. Well, probably longer than that, honestly. But you were playing in a church band, actually. Do you
Yes.
still play with those guys, or?
I still was before the in-person services stopped in March. Yeah, so I think you and I met in 2014. I think is when I started playing at First Lutheran, and that was one of those things where I was pretty skeptical about that gig when I got the call for it. I was
Okay.
actually doing a jazz gig at Valentini's, I think, and the music director of First Lutheran was there and said, "Well, we're looking for a guitar player. Can I have your card?" I gave him my card. I'm like, I'm never going to hear from these people. And a few weeks later, I got a call, and it's, well, it happens every Sunday morning. I don't usually have a gig on Sunday mornings. It pays, and I was like, well, I'll give it a shot, and it worked out well. And so now, almost 6 years later, it's been a pretty consistent part of my schedule on Sunday mornings. So
Excellent, excellent. And yes, I used to run sound there, actually. That's kind of how we met. And
yes.
yeah, I mean, the way that you bring that guitar into what they got going on, and Greg Taberzi is on drums there too. It's absolutely gorgeous what you guys do. And now I seem to recall you guys had kind of started a bar scene a little bit at Sir Ben's there for a little while. How did that go over?
Well, that was the idea of Jason, who was our musical director, and he moved to Michigan last year. So that project kind of went with him. But he had this idea of doing like these tribute night sort of things, where of course, all of us in the band at First Lutheran, we all played and listened to other things outside of that, of course, and so there were certain things that he had put together of like a Billy Joel night and the Bob Seger night and things like that. And so basically it was a time for us to, like, quote unquote, let our hair down for people that maybe had seen us play at the church, but hadn't seen us do any other stuff. And so we would do those at Sir Ben's. Greg Taberzi had a monthly Tuesday night gig at Sir Ben's. So we kind of like would swoop in on his gig since he was playing drums in the band anyway, and do a set of some things, and a bunch of people would come out. The place would be packed for a Tuesday night, and it was fun. It wasn't necessarily my normal type of thing. I don't usually spend my time learning a bunch of Billy Joel songs and things like that. But those experiences can be fun, and that's one of the reasons why I like playing in Duluth. I remember there was one weekend where I did. I had like the Billy Joel gig, and then I did a classical guitar gig, and then a jazz one, and then a rock and roll one. And I was like, this is great because it keeps things interesting, and there was so much variety to it.
Right, and variety, I mean, that's the word that kind of encapsulates Duluth. I mean, during homegrown especially, I mean, you can walk down the block and you got a jazz trio, a punk
Right.
band, and then, an obscure kind of hillbilly band, for lack of a better term. So yeah, there's definitely variety in Duluth, and it's very welcoming. It's a very welcoming scene, I've found.
Yes.
Anyway. It sounds like you've kind of found the same.
Yep.
Since you mentioned covers, and I've talked to musicians out on the East Coast, and they've always told me that cover bands are kind of more sought after than original work, just because people already know the songs. They're more likely to come into a place if they already know the song. Is that kind of what you found out on the East Coast, or is cover bands are more kind of sought after than original work?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why there was a cover band I was in on the East Coast that started just because we wanted work and we wanted to play. We were having such a hard time with these original gigs, like I was talking about before, basically just begging people to even let us play at their crappy little bar, And so we were like, well, we'll just start a cover band, and at least it'll give us a chance to play our instruments and have fun and maybe get paid.
Yeah.
And so that was a big part of it. Although even that was more difficult on the East Coast. There was, when I moved here, I joined a similar sort of thing because I was like, well, I'm not established right away. I'm going to need the work. And so I was playing in a bar band for a couple of years. And that was even here much more enjoyable than it was for me on the East Coast. And but at the same time, I was getting more and more original gigs here, which I was surprised by because I'd always heard, well, people only want to hear stuff that they know. And in general, that's probably true, But in Duluth, I remember somebody was asking about the type of gigs I do. I'm like, well, I stand up there with my guitar, and in 8 out of 10 things I play are original compositions. And the guy goes, oh, and you get away with that? And I go, Yeah, why not? Because I hadn't had any problems in Duluth up to that point, and still haven't. And like you said, it's very accepting. I used to think that what I did was pretty weird. And then when I went to my first homegrown, I was like, oh, I'm way not weird like a lot of these acts, and I mean that in the best way. Like, there's some weird acts that play, people throwing raw meat from the stage at homegrown and stuff like that. Like, this is great. Because I always told people I wasn't actually, people made it seem like my stuff was really like avant-garde or whatever.
Okay.
And I was like, no, the raw meat on stage is avant-garde, and that's great. And that's the type of stuff that we can get here that was actually a new experience for me. Where I was in Connecticut, New York, people wanted a really specific, they wanted the person on a stool with an acoustic guitar singing Wagon Wheel and stuff like that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's what was 100% expected. Yeah. So that's been great in Duluth.
Excellent. Yes, I remember that homegrown. I remember the boar's head ended up on top of a statue in Canal Park. If people are curious, they can look that up. Look up Boarhead Canal Park, Duluth. And I remember some people were disgusted, and I actually tried to get into that show. If I recall correctly, it was at Grandma's Sports Garden, and their venue is actually pretty big for an indoor venue, and it was packed. It was down the street. You couldn't get in, and I remember hearing about the raw meat and the blood, and I was just like, oh, that's not my scene, but go you guys. And then I laughed hysterically the next day when the boar's head was on the statue, but that's homegrown.
Yes, right. I have various opinions on the taste of that, both the musical taste and the boar's head meat, which is actually great meat, by the way. But the thing that I loved about that was it does go to show that you can really do anything. And one thing I found in Duluth, that if what you're doing is good, people will respond to it. So whether you're singing or not singing, whether you're shredding or playing two notes, if it's good and it's honest, there are going to be people here that will respond to it and encourage it. And that's a great thing. And that doesn't happen everywhere in the country. I think people tend to think of Duluth as like a bubble, where it's like, oh, Duluth is so small and all these things. There's not a lot going on, blah, blah, blah. But actually, in comparison to many other places where I've been and where I've played, it's quite a special place in that way.
Yeah, and I think the combination of that is just, we have so many people that play instruments or sing or do art in various forms. I mean, we've got a ton of painters and more kind of noir things going on. I mean, we're a town of filmmakers and photographers and all that's different things kind of in one area. And it's a wonderful combination of what's going on in the community. So, Bryan, like I said before, I am so glad you and your wife moved out here. I am so glad you can add your own flavor to what's going on. That's absolutely wonderful. Now, to get into something you had said before, you said that you don't really sing. I mean, was there ever a moment that you wanted to try your hand at being kind of the singer-songwriter guitar player, or had you decided at a very early age that just wasn't for you?
That's a good question. I think for the most part, it was just something that I kind of fell into. It just happened to be the music that I wanted to do and how I approached the instrument. Even now, these days, when I'm writing original stuff, it's just how I write. I don't write and say, oh, I wish I had vocals on this, or that sort of thing. If I did start feeling that, then I would look into maybe starting a project with a singer and things like that. You never know where the music's going to take you, but for the most part, it was pretty much a natural thing. I mean, I think there was a time when I was like in elementary school, middle school, where I think I did fantasize about being a singer because they were the star, and so I liked being in the front of the stage and all that stuff. But I never really got serious enough about it to say. I think there's some cassette tapes of me like when I was like 8 or 9 years old, playing the guitar and singing some stuff on them. It probably would be good blackmail if my parents ever found those, So I think there was a time where I did do that a little bit, but it wasn't like a conscious, oh, I'm going to do this or I'm going to not. I mean, when you're 9 years old, you just do whatever you feel like doing with that stuff.
Right.
So by the time I got seriously into it, it just wasn't on my radar. It didn't feel like a natural thing for me. And there have been times where I've sung like in bar bands and stuff where I've done backing vocals. And that was a good experience, and I didn't necessarily mind it, but I also haven't missed doing it either. So it's just kind of like if it's a necessary thing where I have to make noise with my mouth on a gig, then I will. But otherwise, I'm happy to let other people who have more of a natural talent for it. I mean, the other thing is that I know my limitations, and I focused my energies on something that I knew I wanted to do and that I could have some proficiency in. And I think I just kind of subconsciously knew early on that that was not going to be singing for me. With the things that I like to do, I like to try to be good at. And and you can be good at singing in different ways. I mean, people can argue like with Bob Dylan's voice and things like that about the technical aspects of it. But I never felt like I needed to express myself musically that way, I guess.
Okay. All right. Wonderful, wonderful. And now, what kind of brought you into the more jazz kind of improvisational musician side of things? Was that just kind of out of necessity to kind of hone your guitar skills?
Well, that's a good question. So the genre of stuff that people always ask, like, well, what genre do you do? And it's kind of tough because it is very improvisational and jazzy in that way, but also a lot of it has a rock tinge to it, kind of a harder edge, at least when I have control of what I'm doing at my own gig, like I don't have to watch volume and things like that. And so I think the improvisational side came out of the type of stuff I listened to when I was a kid. I listened to a lot of players who would improvise their solos rather than playing written solos and things like that. I played a lot of like blues when I was a kid, and that's very improvised. And by the time I was in high school, I was playing in a jazz band and got a lot of experience with it that way. So it's always kind of like I've had the mindset of a jazzer, but the heart of a rock and roller, you know. And so I'm always end up being too hard edged for any jazz purist, and which is fine. I kind of basically, when I know I'm doing it right, I'm basically pissing everyone off because it's too jazzy for the rock and rollers and it's too rock and roll for the jazzers. And people who want folk, I'm not singing or telling stories, and things like that. So it just is another one of those things that kind of developed naturally. Although I do find that over time, my stuff has become more and more harder edged, probably just because I'm getting older and crankier, and things like that.
You're 32.
Yes, exactly. So the improv element, I've always made sure no matter what I do, even when I played in a bar band and we were playing covers, I always improvised my solos each night because that was an important part to me, no matter what style or genre I was playing, to have that where the improvisation is a big thing for me because it's something that only happens in that moment. And it separates that, when you're playing a couple nights in a row and you're playing Hot Blooded by Foreigner, well, it also keeps things interesting, from Friday to Saturday night and things like that too. So, and not everybody has that take on it, which is totally fine. I don't think it's bad if somebody wants to play the same thing all the time and all that. It just happens to be how I developed.
All right. So you're basically punk jazz.
Yeah, that basically, yeah, that's a good way to put it because there is, a punk element to it of, here it is, I'm going to do what I want and what I think is best to do, and you can like it or you cannot. Of course, I hope that people like it, but if they don't, I'm not going to all of a sudden become a folk musician or something like that just because that's what people expect,
Right.
So there's definitely that attitude with it.
Yeah. And Bryan, how have your albums been going? I know you've released a couple, I believe. Has that been more kind of a DIY project, setting up a microphone and a laptop, or have you actually gone into a studio? I think I've released 4 so far since 2002 or whatever, and 2 of them were in professional studios. We, went through all that, and then 2 of them were actually 3 of them. So I've released 5. 3 of them were kind of the DIY thing. Okay. And each one of my DIY albums got better with time. If I listen to some of the earlier stuff, it probably sounds like crap to me. And then shortly after I moved here, I released one that was, and the first 2 DIY ones, they were only guitar. And then I released one in 2017 called The Blue Hour that I did like the Prince thing and played all the instruments on, like I played bass and drums and all that stuff too. And that was a good experience, and I was pretty proud of that at the time, and I still stand by it.
But my engineering and production skills and stuff have increased a lot since then. I'm actually working on a new one now. Like, I think every musician on the planet is pretty much working on an album right now.
Yes.
So like at the end of the year, there's going to be like a million albums that come out. But so I'm working on a new one now that I'm pretty excited about, and some new material that I was playing live before all this started, to kind of work out some of the kinks of it and things like that. And so it's been a good experience. I mean, I think more and more people are probably going to be doing the DIY stuff. But there's some things that you just can't replicate that you can get like in a huge studio with an actual drum room and things like that in it.
Right. And Bryan, if somebody's interested in getting your music or listening to it, I mean, are you on Bandcamp? Are you up on iTunes? Where can they find it?
Yeah, so pretty much all streaming platforms I'm on. My latest two ones are on iTunes, and Spotify has got, I think, 3 of them on there. They just search under my name. It's Bryan with a Y for people that are searching Bryan. And then do have a Bandcamp site too, although my most recent one isn't on Bandcamp because before the pandemic and all this, I was just terrible at keeping my things updated. I mean, my Facebook page, Bryan James Gatten Music, had like a couple updates like a year practically at one point. It was just terrible. You can't do that as an independent musician. But so I've been trying to get up on that stuff. But yeah, so almost any streaming platform and things like iTunes and Amazon Music and stuff like that, people can find my stuff.
Perfect. Have you thought about doing any kind of live stream concerts or anything like that? I know a bunch of musicians, I mean, as soon as all of this kind of hit and things were closing down or, just kind of closing their doors, they jumped right away on, Facebook live stream or VMO or Stage It. I mean, there's 10 million different streaming services now, but have you jumped on that bandwagon?
So I've done 2 Facebook live streams in the last couple of weeks. It took me a long time to jump on it. One, because I'm kind of naturally contrarian. So like at the end of March, when like everybody was doing the live stream from their living room or whatever, I just didn't feel like doing it. I mean, and here's the thing, we're talking about artists in the pandemic and stuff. I think it's important for artists to cut themselves a little bit of slack, because like the whole first month of like when this all started, I was like not inspired at all. Is it anxious, tired, trying to figure out how's everything going to look like, and still practice. But I'm like, I wasn't feeling it, and then that was when everybody thought this was going to last 3 or 4 weeks or whatever. So it's after a while that fog kind of lifted for me, and I started doing a lot of writing and recording. Things like doing a lot of recording recently, which has been a good experience and practicing. And then finally, actually, it was Pastor Diane Loftman and some of the people at First Lutheran, because they haven't heard me play for 2 or 3 months, or longer than that. They encouraged me to do a Facebook live stream of some of my original stuff, and so I did. That was on the summer solstice on June 20th, and I was like, oh, this is fun. It felt like a gig, which my last gig I did was March 12th, so that was it was fun to do that. So I did another one last night. Probably gonna maybe think about doing it almost weekly, maybe like every Saturday night or something, doing a Facebook live stream and kind of getting into that. I've done some live streaming stuff on other platforms like Stage It. There's another one called Street Jelly. But it always kind of felt like just a practice session that people were looking in on. I had trouble getting into the zone with it. Okay. But the last couple of Facebook live streams I've done, it actually felt like a performance, and it was nice to interact with people on there and stuff like that. So you're probably doing more of that in the near future.
Wonderful, Bryan. Wonderful. And Bryan, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us today, share your insights, and share your music. And good luck with your new kind of DIY projects. Good luck with streaming and everything else. And hopefully we'll see you out and about soon.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.